Tonight, a Texas federal judge puts the future of an abortion pill in limbo.
Ultimately, it's going to have to probably end up in the Supreme Court and on a relatively emergency basis.
A legal fight that may put abortion access back in the nation's highest court, and how some Texas lawmakers are responding. Plus, owning an electric car in Texas could soon be more expensive.
Using the gas tax ultimately is not going to solve our structural problem.
Why some state lawmakers think electric vehicle owners should pay a special tax before they hit the road. And later, will Governor Abbott issue a pardon? Just days after being found guilty of murdering a Black Lives Matter protester, why one Texas man may not face any punishment. Capitol Tonight starts right now. Thanks for joining us here on Capitol Tonight. I'm Karina Kling. The Justice Department today appealed a Texas court ruling over a commonly used abortion pill. The Texas judge's decision late Friday would stop approval of mifepristone, which the FDA approved in 2000. The fight from the Justice Department comes as Texas Democrats in Congress are also pushing back. Houston area Representative Lizzie Fletcher announced new legislation today to protect access to the medication.
Very basically reaffirms the FDA's approval through its rigorous process of approving mifepristone 20 years ago, and makes clear that it is available and should continue to be available in the states.
The Texas ruling late Friday came nearly the same time a federal judge in Washington issued a conflicting ruling. Our Washington reporter Rena Diamante reports on this new chapter in the battle over abortion rights and the Texas judge who set it all in motion.
President Joe Biden's Justice Department wasted no time Monday asking an appeals court to freeze a federal judge's decision in Texas to make a medication abortion drug unavailable nationwide. The ruling by District Court Judge Matthew Kaczmarek in Amarillo broke new legal ground almost 10 months after the Supreme Court's reversal of the constitutional right to an abortion in a case known as Dobbs.
You know, if they thought that Dobbs was going to return this issue to the states and everyone would move on happily from there, I think this shows that we're in for quite a bit more litigation on this topic.
Kaczmarek, who was appointed by President Donald Trump, issued his ruling Friday evening, suspending the Food and Drug Administration's more than 20-year-old approval of mifepristone.
The rhetoric he uses is political in nature. It's not medical or scientific by any stretch. And it's pretty scary to think of an ideologue judge like that to be able to have such influence over medical practice.
Kaczmarek, who the Washington Post reported has long held anti-abortion views, sided with the anti-abortion groups who challenged the FDA decision in 2000 that mifepristone was safe and effective.
The FDA put women and girls in harm's way, and it's high time the agency is held accountable for its reckless actions. Pregnancy is not an illness, and chemical abortion drugs don't provide a therapeutic benefit.
The ruling would take effect at the end of the week if it stands. Less than an hour after Kaczmarek's decision, a federal judge in Washington state ordered the FDA to keep mifepristone available in 17 Democratic-led states and the District of Columbia. Amy Hagstrom Miller of Whole Woman's Health says while her organization totally shut down abortion services in Texas last June, it continues to see Texans at its clinics across the country.
Until we hear from the FDA, every Whole Woman's Health clinic and all of our telemedicine practices are still dispensing mifepristone. We're still providing abortions with pills to people.
Experts say this fight over the abortion pill is likely to end up before the Supreme Court. One issue is whether the plaintiffs who brought the case to Kaczmarek have the legal standing to challenge the FDA's approval of the drug. In Washington, Rena Diamante, Capitol Tonight.
We want to bring in Joanna Grossman now to discuss what all this means even further. She's a law professor at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. Professor Grossman, welcome back to the program. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
With these conflicting court rulings, I mean, what does happen next? We mentioned the Biden administration appealed the Texas ruling as expected, but what does all this mean moving forward?
I mean, ultimately, it's going to have to probably end up in the Supreme Court and on a relatively emergency basis. The FDA is a party in both cases and is currently subject to conflicting rulings, meaning it's been ordered to do one thing by the Texas court and ordered to do the opposite, in essence, by the Washington court. So ultimately the Supreme Court's going to have to be the one that says, at least temporarily, how the FDA is supposed to behave in that situation, and perhaps ultimately on the underlying legal issues in these two cases.
How unprecedented is getting these conflicting rulings almost simultaneously?
I mean, it's not completely normal, but at the same time, this is an issue that we've been watching brew in courts around the country. So it's not surprising that they came up at around the same time. Probably one court had their ruling ready and waited for the other court to issue theirs. I mean, it's probably better to get them resolved at the same time rather than to have them, be spread out over months where we have more limbo.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily surprising given the judges in these cases, but what is your reaction to Judge Kaczmarek's ruling? I mean, on the merits of it?
I mean, honestly, it's pretty bonkers from a legal perspective. There are a number of pieces to the ruling that he has to get through to get to his conclusion, and basically none of them make sense. So, he takes a lot of liberties with science. He takes a lot of liberties with law. He takes a lot of liberties with our understanding of who has standing to bring certain kinds of lawsuits, and certainly takes a lot of liberties with his understanding of what the FDA's role is in the drug approval process. So I think you'd be hard pressed to find very many legal experts who look at that ruling and think it makes a lot of sense. There probably are some, but not very many.
You mentioned the Supreme Court at least getting involved temporarily and pretty quickly, potentially. I mean, is this overall just teeing up a case over abortion pills for the Supreme Court in the long run?
Probably that's where we're headed. I don't think the Supreme Court probably wants to take that case right now. It's probably feeling maybe pretty burned by the political backlash from Dobbs. So my guess is, yes, ultimately, if we continue to have these kinds of dueling rulings and controversy over both the availability of medication abortion and the underlying issue, which is whether or not embryos and fetuses have constitutional protections themselves. Probably those issues ultimately are going to go back to the Supreme Court. But if I had to guess, I would say it probably is not going to be this term that we might look and see a more temporary resolution of this particular tension. And then in the longer term, perhaps a repeat trip to the Supreme Court on the merits.
Well, given what you're saying, we just have about 30 seconds left. But I mean, if the Supreme Court were to take up this case, I mean, it's probably seen as the most consequential since the Dobbs decision, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. What does that decision, can we read anything into what that decision would tell us about how the High Court could likely rule in the abortion pill case if they take it up? Yeah,
obviously, a majority of the justices on the Supreme Court do not support abortion rights, They're very, very conservative and also very willing to chart out new territory, which we saw in the Dobbs decision. It may be that they're willing to go as far as the Kaczmarek ruling wants. I don't think so, because I think that really upends a lot of different issues, including, as I said earlier, the issues about who has standing to bring lawsuits, how the FDA functions. So I'm not sure that the court's going to go that far.
Joanna Grossman of SMU, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
The Environmental Protection Agency is expected to take steps this week to tighten restrictions on emission standards. If implemented, the proposed rule changes would require 2/3 of all new passenger vehicles sold in the U.S. to be electric by 2032. But many new electric cars are set to lose a big tax credit under rules proposed by the Treasury Department, likely slowing consumer acceptance. And here in Texas, there's also a push to make purchasing an electric vehicle more expensive than it already is. Our Charlotte Scott reports.
Skylar Williams is plugging in his electric vehicle, or EV, at a charging station off Highway 35 in Central Texas.
Texas's plan is also to have charging every 70 miles.
Rivian's cost about $80,000, and soon Williams could be required to cough up an additional $200 a year. That's because the Senate just passed a bill to tax EV owners $400 at the time of purchase and $200 for future registration renewals. The state's highway infrastructure is paid for by the gas tax, which EVs don't pay. In a statement to Spectrum News, the bill's author, East Texas Senator Robert Nichols, wrote, "Each time time an all-electric vehicle gets on the road and displaces a gas-powered vehicle, the State Highway Fund loses money. This cost adjustment equalizes road use consumption between electric vehicles and gas-powered vehicles.
Number one, $200 is too much, in my opinion. The second thing is when electric vehicle owners have to pay that fee, it's in a lump sum all at once a year.
Owners of gas-powered vehicles have the benefit of paying a small amount of tax every time they fill up their tank instead of all at once. But Senator Nichols came up with the $200 figure by looking at a study by several state agencies. It revealed that every year gas cars pay about $100 in the state gas tax and another $95 in the federal gas tax. But the study went on to say that EVs should be taxed half as much at $100 annually. Austin area Democrat Sarah Eckhart says the $200 vehicle registration fee is appropriate.
As EVs come on the market and represent a larger percentage of the cars on the road, that EVs really do need to pay something. And right now they're paying, being an EV owner, are paying nothing.
Williams thinks some sort of tax on EVs is needed, but he worries this one is too high.
I'm more concerned with those that may not be in the same financial position, that this would dissuade them from being able to have an electric vehicle.
For Capitol Tonight, I'm Charlotte Scott.
One Texas senator had a life-saving procedure last year thanks to a family member who donated an organ. Now he's got a bill to encourage more Texans to become donors themselves. North Texas Senator Kelly Hancock received a kidney from his son-in-law to help fight a rare kidney disease. That inspired him to introduce legislation to educate the public on becoming a living donor. Experts say this would help more Texans make a difference.
And so we're excited to update our communication efforts to include living donation as a viable, solid option for people that are looking to save someone's life.
Hancock's bill passed unanimously in the Senate. It now goes to the House for approval. Still to come on Capitol Tonight, rumors at the Capitol, what we know about a complaint filed against a far-right state lawmaker. Plus, calling for clemency, why Governor Abbott is asking the state's parole board to consider granting a pardon in a recent murder conviction. Welcome back. Let's get a check now of some of the other political stories making headlines across Texas. A complaint against a far-right state lawmaker alleges he had an inappropriate relationship with an intern. The Texas Tribune obtained a copy of the complaint filed with the House Investigating Committee. Northeast Texas Representative Brian Slayton is accused of inviting the intern back to his condo and giving her alcohol even though she was under 21. Slayton hired a criminal defense attorney who released a statement calling the claims false and outrageous. Slayton's been the subject of rumors in recent days after he missed the House budget debate Thursday. The State House gave tentative approval to a bill that would scrap criminal penalties for fentanyl test strips. It's another in a series of recent efforts by state leaders to fight opioid overdoses. Fentanyl test strips are currently illegal because they're classified as drug paraphernalia. And Governor Abbott is calling for a pardon for a U.S. Army sergeant convicted of murdering an Austin protester in 2020. Abbott is asking the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles to recommend clemency for Daniel Perry. Perry was just found guilty of killing Garrett Foster during a Black Lives Matter protest. Travis County District Attorney Jose Garza says it's the job of the jury, not the governor, to decide if a defendant is guilty or innocent. Under Texas law, the parole board has to recommend a pardon before the governor can approve it. Let's bring in the Quorum Report's Harvey Kronberg now. Harvey, a lot to get to with you tonight. Good to see you. Here's part of Governor Abbott's tweet shortly after Perry was found guilty, saying, and I quote, "Texas has one of the strongest stand your ground laws of self-defense that cannot be nullified by a jury or a progressive district attorney." I thought we had that tweet. Daniel Perry claimed self-defense. Why is the governor getting involved in this, do you think?
Sadly, for two reasons. One is that it was a Black Lives Matter demonstration, and of course that's the antipathy of the Republicans towards the Black Lives Matter movement, even after the conviction of the police officers around the murder of George Floyd, has been consistent and persistent. But the second, sadly, and this is truly sad, is that he was taken to task by Tucker Carlson. It seems like Tucker Carlson is actually the guy driving the governor's office. Every time he, let's just say there's always a race to get onto Fox News except for Carlson with the governor. And the fact that they disagreed with the jury and did not let it go through the appeals process and then upended the jury's decision really gives lie to all the chest beating that goes on around law enforcement, defunding the police, and all the rest when you show open contempt for the process like that.
Well, given that, I mean, how likely is it the parole board sides with Governor Abbott?
Since he appointed all of them and he's essentially instructed them that this is what they're going to do, it's pretty pro forma. Yeah. The bottom line to me is it's just baffling that you're not going to allow the process to play itself out. A political decision has been made that this was a righteous shooting, and despite the facts presented and the fact it was an 8-day trial, that they would simply presumptively presume that he had was not guilty. Yeah. Adds just one more political taint to the trajectory of the court system right now.
I want to ask you also about Representative Brian Slayton. What do you know about the complaint alleging that he had an inappropriate relationship with an intern, and where does this go from here?
I know it was filed with the General Investigating Committee, which is the committee that handles both ethics and impropriety related issues in the Texas House of Representatives. It's an internal body. I want to say at the outset that simply because there's an allegation, we've seen in the past that allegations do not always bear out, and so while the Capitol during a legislative session is essentially a gossip mine, we need to be able to take a deep breath and step back on this. However, having said that, the ironies here are pretty overwhelming. This is perhaps one of the most homophobic members, most anti-abortion. He's led a ministry for children at his church back home. He has a large family, and he is positioned himself in the Texas House as being the moral policeman. And the fact that he finds himself in this situation where he's being accused. Now, whether there's something criminal, that's the second discussion that's going on. If the allegations bear out, was there anything criminal in that? And I guess serving alcohol to a minor, if that were the case, might be illegal, but it's not. It's an ethical and proprietary issue.
Well, legislatively speaking, we just have about 30 seconds left, but he was the only one absent during the debate, the budget debate, and he had proposed nearly 30 amendments. I mean, how do you think the conversation, do you think it would have changed had he been there?
Not at all. There would have been, he would have forced a number of symbolic votes that would have given some of his colleagues heartburn. The appropriations debate was uncharacteristically agreeable. Yeah. There were probably only 8 to 10 record votes in this 15-hour proceeding, and the bill was actually finally passed on a voice vote. I'm pretty sure he would have objected to all of those voice votes. Yeah. Put everybody on the record.
Sure. Yeah, it would have taken a lot longer then, probably.
Yes.
Harvey Kronberg, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Nearly 300 migrants showed up at the Paso del Norte International Bridge in Juarez today. They reportedly believed a false rumor that authorities would let them enter the country without an appointment. Officials say the crowd dispersed without incident, but the bridge was closed for several hours. This comes after an incident last month when hundreds of migrants rioted while trying to cross into the U.S. based on social media rumors. Still to come on Capitol tonight, a code for the High Court. Why some U.S. lawmakers are pushing for Supreme Court justices to follow a set list of ethics. Welcome back. Democrats in Congress are pushing for a code of ethics for members of the U.S. Supreme Court. This comes after a report last week revealed Justice Clarence Thomas accepted luxury trips from a Dallas-based billionaire and Republican megadonor for 20 years. Reuben Jones is in Washington with more.
The U.S. Supreme Court is an elite institution with just 9 members serving lifetime terms. It's also unique because of what it lacks.
The Supreme Court is now not subject to the code of conduct that applies to every other single judge in the federal system.
The news site ProPublica last week reported that Justice Clarence Thomas accepted a series of luxury trips for nearly 2 decades, paid for by a Republican megadonor, and that Thomas never listed the trips on his annual financial disclosure forms. Caroline Fredrickson is a visiting professor at Georgetown University's law school.
One of the issues that's highlighted here is that the disclosure laws are clearly not enough.
I believe that the Supreme Court should be held to the same standards that members of Congress are held to.
Democrats, including Representative Deborah Ross of North Carolina, a member of the House Judiciary Committee, are demanding that Congress pass a code of ethics for Supreme Court justices.
Members of Congress have to face the voters on a regular basis. But if you have a lifetime appointment, you must be held to the highest standard of integrity.
What could that code of ethics entail? Fredrickson says it could include stricter rules on the disclosure of gifts, a more transparent recusal process for when justices have a conflict of interest in a case, and stricter rules about family members that partake in political activities that connect to a case before the court.
And if our Supreme Court can't abide those kinds of limitations, well, I think maybe they need to find another job.
The court could create its own written code, but hasn't done so. And if one is created, while impeachment by Congress is an option, it's unclear how the rules would actually be enforced. In Washington, Reuben Jones, Capitol Tonight.
And before we go tonight, the White House hosted its annual Easter egg roll this morning. Officials say more than 30,000 people turned out to track down eggs on the White House lawn. The tradition dates back to the 1870s, and this year the White House even sent an egg to the International Space Station to teach kids about gravity. That is all the time that we have tonight. We're back tomorrow with the latest in Texas politics. Until then, thanks for watching. Have a great night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. For more refreshing stories about your community, click the subscribe button over here. You can also download our Spectrum News app and tune in to Channel 55 on Dish and DirecTV to get live news coverage, weather updates every 10 minutes, and more. We'll see you then.